Who wants to be next? I don't, because no one else does.
And serial killers and most killers in general have a dead conscience.
Los Angeles police today added more killings to those already linked with the murderer called the Night Stalker.
I believe also there's a malevolent force that is out there.
Patrols and warned residents to lock their doors and windows.
Death is death, and it is said that no man knows his own death. Sure, for a few minutes you might feel it.
It's the most difficult case now.
As Richard Ramirez himself said, is evil born or is evil made?
Is there such a thing as bad seed when a baby is born? Is he already filled, already made, or is he created?
Looking back at his life may provide us some clues to these answers. You see, Richard was born to Mercedes and Julian Ramirez on February 29, 1960 in El Paso, Texas, and Richard would be the youngest of 5 children. Richard also wouldn't have the best of childhoods growing up. His father Julian had a violent temper and was often gone as he worked on the railroad, and his mother Mercedes often spent long hours working in a shoe factory. At 2 years old, a heavy dresser would fall on Richard's head, giving him 30 stitches and a major concussion. Then, at 5 years old, Richard would have an accident on a swing set. This would give him another concussion and stitches. Later that year, Richard would be diagnosed with epilepsy and would start to experience seizures in school. It's still unknown if his head injuries had contributed to this. However, most experts agree that the epilepsy and early head traumas were the cause of his horrific visions and dreams that he would later associate with Satan's callings.
When I was young, when I was like 5, 6, I opened the curtains outside the window. There was a monster, big, hairy monster.
And now, at 10 years old, Richard was smoking marijuana on a regular basis and getting into trouble. At the age of 12, Richard's cousin Mike returned home from Vietnam after completing 2 tours of duty. In Richard's eyes, Mike was a war hero. Mike would often brag to young Richard about the things that he had done over in Vietnam. He would show him pictures of at least 22 women that he had raped, murdered, and mutilated. Mike also taught Richard how to kill in a stealthy manner and conceal himself in the dark of night. One day during the summer, Mike's wife Jessie had come home from grocery shopping. She was very upset that the two were still sitting in the kitchen partying, and an argument soon broke out. During the argument, Mike had gotten up and walked over to the refrigerator to retrieve his pistol. This further enraged Jessie, and she dared Mike to shoot him. Right in front of their 2 kids and Richard, Mike shot Jessie point blank in the face, killing her instantly.
It struck me that she was dead, because I knew her pretty good. Death had a very profound effect on me when I saw it. I didn't think about other people's feelings and needs.
Miguel Ramirez, Mike, would only serve 4 years at the Texas State Mental Institution for the slaying of his wife due to PTSD.
I can still remember going to the Capri Theater in El Paso. It was in downtown, and I used to go alone. See, some people go to theaters to get scared, What made you think that? I took it home.
Richard would start getting into other heavier drugs, even using LSD at this point. He would also start to get into lots of trouble, like breaking into cars and petty theft, and his dad would beat him mercilessly for it.
You just love, doing burglary so much, right? I still dream about it.
Shortly after witnessing Miguel kill his wife, Richard became withdrawn from his family and friends, and eventually moved in with his older sister Ruth and her husband Roberto. Roberto was a known peeping Tom, and he would start to take Richard out on his adventures. Together, Richard and Roberto would practice hiding in the dark and peeping on unsuspecting victims. At 15, Richard got a job at a local Holiday Inn motel. Just weeks after being hired, he was caught trying to molest 2 girls in an elevator. Then one night, Richard had snuck into a guest room and tried to sexually assault a lady that was in there. However, her husband unexpectedly returned and started to beat on Richard. Richard then made an escape and was later arrested the following day.
They are morally superior, as they so commonly claim, but because they are imprisoned, web of responsibilities, commitments.
However, Richard was quickly released as the couple refused to come back to Texas to testify against him. At 16, Richard's cousin Miguel would return from the state mental institution. Richard, Roberto, and Miguel would continue on peeping into windows and casing out places. They would also break into cars and commit petty larceny. Richard would eventually move to California, where he attended a convention for the Church of Satan. And this is where he would meet Anton Zander LaVey, who was the church's high priest until his death in 1997.
I think there is a divine force that is out there. I believe also there's a malevolent force.
One night, Richard would call his mother and let her know that he had switched over to Satanism. Then shortly after, Richard was arrested for driving the car that he had stolen. Richard was living out of two different apartments now. One day, at his Tenderloin District apartment, around midday of April 10th, 1984, Mei Liang, a 9-year-old Chinese-American girl, and her brother were in the stairwell of the apartment building. Mei Liang lost a dollar bill. Mei's brother went into the apartment and left Mei outside. At some point, Ramirez approached Mei and talked her into following him into the basement to find the lost dollar bill. Later that day, her partially nude body tied to a drain pipe would be found. Richard would not be convicted of this crime until 2009, when there was a match in his DNA and DNA left at the crime scene. Then on June 28th, the body of Jeannie Vincow was found in her apartment. She'd been stabbed repeatedly in the head, neck, and chest areas while sleeping in her bed. Ramirez had left a fingerprint on the screen that he removed to gain entry into her apartment. In the evening of March 17, 1985, Ramirez attacked 22-year-old Maria Hernandez inside the garage of her home. He shot at her face with a .22 caliber pistol. However, the bullet ricocheted off her car keys as she raised her hand to protect herself. Maria's friend Dale Okazaki had heard the commotion, so she hid behind a counter in the kitchen. Unbeknownst to her, Ramirez was already inside the house, and when she peeked her head above the counter, he shot her in the forehead, killing her instantly. Within an hour of Okazaki's murder, Ramirez pulled 30-year-old Veronica Yu out of her car and shot her twice with his .22 caliber pistol. Veronica Yu would die before she reached the hospital. These two murders and the attempted murder of Maria Hernandez caught the attention of the local news media. Due to the MO left at each scene, the media started to call the killer the walk-in killer and the Valley Intruder. 10 days later, on March 27th, Ramirez broke into a home that he had previously burglarized a year earlier in Whittier, California. This was the home of Vincent and Maxine Zazzara. Ramirez shot Vincent in the head while he was sleeping. The deadly gunshot startled Maxine awake. Ramirez then beat Maxine and tied her to the bed and demanded to know where all the valuables were. At one point, Maxine got free. She reached under the bed and grabbed a shotgun, pointed it at Ramirez, and pulled the trigger, but the gun was not loaded. This enraged Ramirez, who then stabbed Maxine with a butcher's knife and then proceeded to gouge her eyes out, put them in a jewelry box, and keep them until the day that he was arrested. When Ramirez fled the scene, he had left a footprint outside the window made by a rare pair of Avia sneakers. Police ballistics were able to match up the bullets used in the previous murders with this one. They now knew they had a serial killer on their hands. On May 14, 1985, Ramirez went back to the Monterey Park area where he broke into the home of Bill and Lillian Doy. Ramirez then shot Bill 3 times in the face before beating him unconscious. After ransacking the house and brutalizing Lillian, he fled the scene. On May 29, 1985, Ramirez drove a stolen car to Monrovia area where he used a hammer to bludgeon Mabel Bell and her sister Florence Lang. He then used a bare electrical cord to torture and shock both women. Before leaving the scene, he would use red lipstick to draw satanic symbols on both women and their bedrooms. The following day, Richard broke into the home of Carol Kyle in Burbank, California. He sexually assaulted Carol, ransacked the home, then left both Carol and her 11-year-old son tied together as he fled the scene. July 2nd, Ramirez drove a stolen car to Arcadia, where he broke into the home of Mary Cannon. He bludgeoned Mary Cannon with a lamp, then stabbed her to death using a 10-inch butcher's knife he had found in her kitchen. 3 nights later, Ramirez then broke into the home of Sierra Madra. Ramirez bludgeoned Whitney Bennett, who was 16 years old at the time and staying at the house. Ramirez used a tire iron to beat her, then tried to strangle her with a telephone cord, but the telephone cord started to spark, and Ramirez took this as a sign from Jesus Christ. Whitney Bennett survived the brutal beatings and strangulation and also received 478 stitches to her scalp due to the beatings from Ramirez. Ramirez had quit doing cocaine, and he bought a machete. Then he drove a stolen Toyota to the Glendale area. Ramirez broke into Max and Leela Needing's home. Ramirez then began to hack and slash both Max and Leela with the machete. Ramirez then shot both of them in the head with his .22 caliber pistol. After ransacking the house, Ramirez further mutilated both of their bodies with the machete. Early morning of July 20th, Ramirez broke into the home of the Covant family. Ramirez shot Chanarong Covant in the head and instantly killed him with a .25 caliber pistol. Ramirez then tied up their 8-year-old son and proceeded to repeatedly sexually assault Samkid Covant. On August 8th, Ramirez drove to the home of Elias and Sakina Abawa. Around 2:30 a.m., he shot and killed Elias and then continually abused Sakina Abawa. After ransacking the house, he left the scene.
I came to California, and I came here to live. And I came looking for a pot of gold, but I found a pot of iron instead.
Ramirez had been following the media coverage of his crimes and started to feel the pressure of local law enforcement. He decided to leave Los Angeles area and head up to San Francisco area. On August 18th, he broke into the home of Peter and Barbara Pan. Ramirez shot Peter in the temple, killing him instantly. Ramirez assaulted and beat Barbara before shooting her in the head and leaving her for dead. Ramirez would use lipstick once again to draw a pentagram and also write the words "Jack the Knife" on their bedroom wall. Once again, Richard Ramirez left another Avia shoe print at the scene.
I didn't mind seeing all that gore and violence. It was a turn on. It was exciting.
On August 24th, Ramirez broke into the house of Bill Carnes, who was living with his fiancée Inez Erickson. Ramirez shot Bill in the head 3 times and then beat and bludgeoned Inez. He ransacked the house. Then he drug Inez through the house, making her swear to Satan that there were no more cash or jewelry. Bill was rushed to the hospital. He had 3 bullets removed from his skull. Bill survived his attack. Police found the abandoned vehicle that Ramirez had stolen. They also found 1 single fingerprint, and using a DNA and fingerprint database, they were able to identify who the Night Stalker actually was.
Satan is a stabilizing force in my life. It gives me a reason to be, an excuse to rationalize.
On August 30th, Richard decided to take a bus to Tucson, Arizona in hopes of visiting his older brother. However, Richard's brother was not home, so he returned to the Los Angeles area, where a group of women identified him as the person on the front page of the newspaper. Richard fled the scene and tried to hijack a car, but was quickly pulled out. He ran away and tried to hijack another car, but the young lady's husband struck Richard over the head with a metal bar. By now, a group of people have gathered around. They knocked Richard to the ground and started beating on him. 2 nearby policemen quickly apprehended Richard and took him to the Hollenbeck police station.
What's your name, huh?
Richard Ramirez, the man that became the Night Stalker, would eventually be convicted on 43 charges to include 13 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 sexual assault charges, and 14 burglary charges. Richard Ramirez was sent to San Quentin Prison and sentenced to die in the gas chamber. Richard Ramirez would spend a total of 27 years on death row due to a series of appeals. At the age of 56, he would die due to complications of B-cell lymphoma.
That had a very profound effect on me when I saw it. He used to say, "There's no thrill like a good kill."